Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Acting for Justice event. My name is Jack Jezreel, and I am part of the leadership team of Just Faith Ministries. I'm joined tonight by my colleague, Andrea Martin Gaddis, tonight's co-host, and we're just so delighted you could join us. So let's begin our program this evening, as we usually do, with prayer. This prayer was written by Cole Arthur Riley. He's the author of Black Liturgies, a book and digital project that connects spiritual practice with Black emotion, Black memory, and Black body. This prayer has been incorporated, with the author's permission, of course, into our Just Faith program entitled Faith and Racial Equity. The subtitle is Exploring Power and Privilege. And this prayer is just as relevant today as it was when it was written in 2020. So let us pray. Being Christianly in white spaces has all too often become synonymous with politeness. To me, nothing is more Christian than breaking the hands of injustice that are strangling my brother. Don't tell us to calm down when we're saying, I can't breathe. Protector God, we confess that we have diluted what it means to be Christian with a person's capacity for niceness. We have smothered afflicted voices with shallow proclamations of peace and unity. Instead of listening well, we police how a person cries out without hearing the very words they are crying. But we are grateful, Lord, that you don't ask us to be nice, but to do mercy and justice. Help us to redefine our peacemaking, that it would be known as that holy kindness which brings the fire of justice and a torrential truth-telling to all in its path. Make us people more concerned with protecting life than protecting the image of Christianity, which need not be protected. Bless our screaming, our weeping, our marching, our fight, that our pain would no longer be invalidated by how it moves when we are gasping. Amen.
Amen.
And now Andrea will share a few logistics about tonight's gathering and introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Jack. Welcome, everybody, once again. It's so good to have you here. So just a couple of housekeeping tips as we get started today. So this event is being recorded, and you will receive an email early next week with the recording. We will invite you to drop questions for Father Manuel, our speaker tonight, into the chat for a Q&A that we'll have at the end of the presentation. So we'll collect those as we go, and we'll also provide a moment at the end of the presentation for additional questions. We invite you all to remain muted during the presentation and the Q&A because there are so many of us here tonight. But you can always send messages to myself, to Jack, or in the group chat to everybody, and we'll either respond in the chat or during the Q&A portion of the event. And finally, I just want to thank you all for joining us tonight, and also for those who help make these monthly webinars possible through your donations and support of Just Faith Ministries. So thank you once again. Now, it is my great honor to introduce to you tonight's presenter. I've had the great pleasure of knowing Father Manuel for almost 10 years now as pastor of Resurrection Catholic Missions in Montgomery, Alabama. Father Manuel carries on the great legacy of civil rights leaders in the city of Montgomery, the birthplace of the civil rights movement. He preaches the gospel not just from the pulpit, but also to the steps of the state capitol, where he is never afraid to challenge and confront Alabama legislators on the state's regressive policies on the death penalty, prison conditions, healthcare, and education. Father Manuel has served on the boards of numerous national and local organizations, too many to name, but ranging from the National Black Catholic Clergy Caucus to the organization formerly known as Montgomery AIDS Outreach. He's been the chair of the National Catholic Development Conference, and co-director at the Institute of Black Catholic Studies at Xavier University, where he also teaches. He preaches revivals and missions throughout the U.S., specializing in African American Catholic spirituality and history. And he recently authored a chapter in the anthology Preaching Racial Justice from Orbis Books. Father Manuel builds on the lineage of both African American and Catholic calls for social justice, and we are delighted to welcome him here as our speaker today. Father, thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you for the kind invitation. As I scroll through some of the attendees, I noticed some very esteemed and beloved colleagues like Sister Eva Loomis and Sister Gail Lawanga, among others. And so I do want to send a special greeting to them. They have been inspirations to me, and in the tenure that I served as a assistant co-director for the Institute for Black Catholic Studies, our real leader and the genius behind keeping the Institute afloat and flourishing in that period was Sister Eva Loomis. So greetings to all of them and to any of the Resurrection parishioners who joined us. I thank you all for the kind invitation to come and share with you this evening. It's an honor and a privilege. And also, as importantly, it gives me a personal opportunity to do something which I have been inviting, challenging, exhorting, literally almost begging everyone within my circle of influence to do as we face this intensive, organized, and to my mind, demonic effort to not only destroy this democracy, but also to destroy an imperfect world order, but certainly one that was ever so significantly moving towards equity and justice for all people on this planet, especially the most vulnerable. But also an effort being made to make our faith communities, as well as this democracy, not resemble anything like the beloved community of MLK and of Howard Thurman and of St. Augustine and his call to make this earthly city resemble more closely the heavenly city that we all say we aspire to. And so, in getting this invitation to share with you tonight, you give me an opportunity to do something. And that's what I have been encouraging the people of Resurrection and others in my purview to do in these last few months, most especially, but really for years. The work of Just Faith, since your existence, has been building the beloved community. And I think in these days, your continued work becomes very much the work of resistance. Uh, the work must continue, I think, in all your programs and formats that you're using now. But I would strongly exhort and encourage you to continue to intensify those efforts and perhaps to even seek new approaches to be added to your already magnificent efforts. Jack, Jezreel, your vision and that of your officers and staff and your partners and participants around the country is a critical component of the resistance that our church and our country and indeed our world needs at this moment. And I have been for 10 years, uh, been inspired and encouraged by Andrea Martin Gaddis and her family. And I am privileged to pray with her and her family almost weekly here at Resurrection. And so that is a tremendous blessing to me. I'm reminded as we are hosting theology graduate students from the Catholic Theological Union in Chicago this week on our campus that the bulk of the leadership of the modern civil rights movement were young women and young men, most of them well under their 35th or 40th birthday. And that reminds me and challenges me as a baby boomer to figure out a way to continue to develop, to encourage, to find young people who have a heart for justice and who can bring the gifts of their youth and the gifts of their technology and the gift of their having grown up and come to fruition, coming to adulthood in a world that is very much improved compared to the world in which I grew up in the segregated South. And so I want to present with you tonight 7 thoughts about the need for us to realize and to proclaim boldly that diversity, equity, and inclusion are gospel values. All of us on this Zoom know that already in a deeply fundamental way. The Hebrew Testament is certainly replete with the progress that Israel made, realizing that the God of Abraham and Sarah was not a tribal deity, that this God was the creator, the sustainer of all human life. And so the Jewish Bible is replete with texts and stories which reveal that there were lepers in Israel, but through the prophet Elisha, it was Naaman who was cured, the Syrian general. When we look at the gospel of Jesus, we certainly know of the magnificent stories and encounters that he has with the Samaritans, Samaritan woman at the well, the grateful Samaritan who, being cured of his leprosy, came back and thanked the Lord. When we look at the Acts of the Apostles and the Pauline corpus, when we look at the fact that Paul's magnus opus, his letter to the Romans, was delivered to the church in Rome by a woman who we might continue to argue whether she was a deacon or not, but it was Phoebe, whom he admonished the Roman church to treat with dignity and to welcome her graciously, who brought that good news. And so the Judeo-Christian tradition, there is no doubt that those values of diversity and equity and inclusion are fundamental. We know this. But in this environment, where political and ecclesial forces have created and have promulgated a version of Christianity that is centered with an American Christ, an Americanist Christ who thinks like certain political forces and ecclesial forces in our country think, who like the people that they like, and who hate the people that they hate. And so, in this context, that version of Christianity is certainly blasphemous, and that's not too strong a word. I think one of the first things we have to do in our resistance is to acknowledge that and to claim without any hesitation or reservation that DEI are gospel values. We can't let language continue to be co-opted and demonized by those forces which do not aspire to a beloved community, who do not aspire to a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy, who do not aspire to a world where humanity is being elevated from uh, those wealthy and vastly rich nations to those indigenous and nations that are struggling to achieve a level of infrastructure and economic security and cultural security that will make their people's lives better. And so we have to, first of all, fully assert, remind ourselves, DEI are gospel values. Okay. Second thing that I think we're challenged to do is we have to make the move consciously of working from the micro to the macro. The scale and the scope of what's being done in this country and what's being fomented around the world um, is daunting. It is very clear, and if you didn't have any if you had any doubts about it, the latest immigration stunt by our president to welcome a group of white Afrikaners, South Africans, to the United States at the same time that they are seizing and sending back people from Central America and Latin America and South America who are really seeking to escape horrible regimes, violence, and degradation of them and oppression of them. The effort is very much determined to make of the United States a revised version 2 of an apartheid fascist South Africa. And so that is overwhelming. It can be disconcerting. It's so pervasive that it can almost lead us to the point of being numb. How many outrages can we take in mentally if we look to our full sources of media and information each day? And so knowing this and experiencing the outrages, each one becoming even more ridiculous than the last, as well as more inhumane and harmful, we can get to the point where we are tempted to say, well, what do I do? Where do I start? What can be done? And it's clear if we take uh, both a gospel-centered response to that inclination as well as looking historically to how people have battled and been successful against unjust structures and systems, it is clear that proximity creates a level of power. Proximity creates a level of power. Our friend Brian Stevenson famously says here in Central Alabama and Montgomery and across the country that one of the ways that, in addition to the great work that they're doing um, with education and formation and advocacy, that people have to be encouraged to get proximate to each other. One of the reasons why people can be demonized, why they can be dehumanized, is we have no experience of them. Uh, Gated communities lead to gated thinking and to gated actions. And so I am particularly impressed, and I want to encourage Just Faith again in your model of small group interaction, that kind of formation, that kind of advocacy, that kind of training is powerful. And do not lose sight of that power. Maintain it, expand it, know that it is transformative. Last night at this justice dinner that we hosted for the graduate theologians from Catholic Theological Union, one of the speakers was a woman who, in her youth, at 13, 14, 15 years of age, came under the tutelage of Rosa Parks here in Montgomery. And Mrs. Parks, not only for the famous event of refusing to give up her seat on the bus that fateful day, was very active with the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, and had for years before that event gone around Alabama and throughout the South collecting information, data about the abuses in particular that women of color, that African American women suffered at the hands of misogynistic and racist attacks and assaults. And so her justice work didn't begin that day. And so Doris Crenshaw was one of her junior NAACP leaders. And in her comments to the CTU scholars last night, most of whom are under 40, she said to them, I want you to realize that the modern civil rights movement, probably at its height, if you began in 1951, 52, 53 with the Montgomery movement, to the death of Martin Luther King in 1968, there were probably no more than 200 people who were working actively full-time as their career, as their vocation, as their discipleship, as their charge to fight for social justice and for civil rights. 200 people. And that power came because those folks were active in local organizations in small group settings. And she said to the attendees at the meeting last night, we met in Mrs. Parks' living rooms, the junior uh, members of the local Montgomery chapter of the NAACP. And if you could get 12 of us in the room, that was standing room only. It was truly a small group gathering. And so there is much power in proximity and in that approach. I am cognizant that one of the things that I think we have done here in the last 20 years, 20 plus years at Resurrection is to host groups like the CTU and other Catholic and public and even national universities who come here, and they come specifically to see what has been the role of people of faith in advancing justice. And so they will visit the EJI sites. They will visit the Southern Poverty Law Center. They will visit Dexter Avenue King Memorial Baptist Church. They will go to Birmingham to look at the museum and the Civil Rights Institute there. They will go to the Rosa Parks Museum. They will talk with folks that we gathered to just share their reflections with them, like my 91-year-old father who drove during the Montgomery bus boycott, like Mrs. Crenshaw, who worked with uh, Rosa Parks, like Nelson Malden, who was Dr. King's barber from the minute he arrived in Montgomery and remained a friend and a confidant until 1968. Dr. King actually had been in the barbershop a few months before his assassination. And what these folks share is the kind of insight and motivation that came from a personal engagement. And their awareness was that this system of segregation and dehumanization of people of color in this country was certainly well ensconced. It was in law, it was pervasive, but they knew that within their immediate communities, there was something they could do, something they could do. And so the Diane Nashes, the Fannie Lou Hamers, the Julian Bonds, the people that Doris Crenshaw got to know after she was mentored by Mrs. Parks, um, became colleagues of hers. And they were able then to sustain those organizations that made such an impactful change in the way that people of color were treated in this country. Proximity brings power. I don't know how many of you read Isabel Wilkerson's book, Cast, or perhaps you saw the film. And I'm always touched by that one particular scene in Cast where after Isabel's husband dies tragically suddenly, um, she's experiencing some kind of plumbing or problem in her home, and she has a repairman to show up. And they are down in the basement of the house looking at the water heater or the furnace or whatever it is that's the source of the issue. And she noticed that he has a big MAGA cap on the top of his head. And he looks at her and she looks at him. And there's this moment where there's no dialogue between the two of them, but uh, you can see in their expressions that there has been a connection, a human connection made, some level of empathy and acknowledgement of the other person as a human being occurs. And they end up having this very brief conversation about loss. And she shares that she's lost her husband. And if I remember the scene correctly, the repairman shares that there's been a death in his family. And it's in that moment of shared experience of loss that a connection, a bond is made between these two human beings who certainly would have had diametrically opposed views of reality, of politics, of what constitutes citizenship, the whole range of our involvement as citizens and as believers. I also think of something that I do here, and it's kind of my little subversive but subtle way. I do a lot of cooking, and there's a farmer's market about 5 minutes away from our parish and mission center. And the market is managed and owned by a family, and it's a predominantly white family. And it's clear from little things that they wear and occasionally a cup or a mug that they're very much supporters of the MAGA movement. And I will deliberately, when I go to shop on some Saturdays, wear a T-shirt that says Black Voters Matter, or I will wear a pin or something that certainly promotes my notion of what this country and what our church and what polite society should be. And over the years, I've done things like say, would you like to see a picture of where these beautiful flowers that I buy here every week, how we use them to decorate our altar? And well, where's your church? And I tell them it's Resurrection Catholic Church, and it's just over the bypass and down the road there near the Interstate I-65. And they'll sometimes they will look stunned and they'll say, "Oh," and I'll say, "Well, why don't you come some Sunday and see how we worship and see the flowers in reality as opposed to this little picture I have here on the iPhone." And so that begins conversations. And much to my delight, after maybe a year and a half of doing this, I look out one Sunday into the congregation, and there are two of the ladies who sell me my bananas and my squash and my eggplants and my collard greens, and they're sitting there in the church. And I made a very pronounced point of welcoming them and letting the rest of the congregation know that they helped me to remain healthy by selling me good, wholesome fruits and vegetables. And that's a gift to my ministry. We have to engage on a one-on-one human level, especially with the folks that we think will be most resistant to our views of reality, to our notion of what constitutes an ecclesial community that is diverse and equitable and inclusive, and as well a country. And so I I am a great proponent. I think Brian Stevenson is absolutely right. Proximity creates a level of power. The fourth point is I think we have to make sure that we are decidedly choosing to collaborate, to build coalitions with like-minded organizations, and sometimes with organizations that perhaps we only share a few values with. After the murder of George Floyd, I approached my staff and our pastoral council officers and said that we need to make a response as a community of faith in this city of all places. We need to say and do something besides the things that we do through our healthcare and through our education and our direct aid and our food pantry and all of those good works. We need to do something else. And so we decided to place on the front of the church what you see there on the screen, which is a huge banner that says Black Lives Matter. Uh, I am utterly convinced that no one person, no one organization, no one institution will have all of the resources or the vision to accomplish the task of building the beloved community, of entrenching and building upon the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion, in resisting the wave of fascism that is sweeping across our country and indeed across the world. And so coalition building and collaboration is absolutely essential. When I look at the modern civil rights movement, and I look at people like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, I look at organizations like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, when I look at the SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, when I look at CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, when I look at the National Council of Negro Women, when I look at the National Baptist Convention, which in many ways, through its leadership, objected to the proactive responses and activities of Dr. King and others, then they formed the Progressive Baptist Convention. But all of those groups did not certainly agree on everything. There were some fundamental principles, some foundational principles that they did agree upon, and they managed to find those common critical values, and they managed to work together to foment the change, to help to implement those values, to bring them to fruition. And so you don't have to agree. And it's probably good that we don't agree on everything in order to work with other institutions, organizations, and individuals who perhaps we only have a couple of values in common, but those values can be enough to unite us. That sign caused all kinds of reactions, immediate reactions, strong and passionate reactions. The under 40-year-olds in our faith community immediately went to Snapchat, to TikTok, to Instagram, and to Facebook, those who are trying to watch and see what their parents are doing on the internet. And they posted pictures and they proudly claimed, this is the place where I pray. This is my parish. This is my community. And these are our values. And so for them, it was an affirmation that we simply, as a faith community and me as pastoral servant, we would not ignore what was happening in the country. We would not ignore what was happening in the country. One of the reactions that I received was from a local United States Air Force officer. Montgomery is the home of a huge Air Force installation that practically serves as a graduate school for women and men who will be career officers in the United States Air Force. And so once they leave the Air Force Academy or do their stints at the Pentagon or at other major installations around the country, they come here for graduate degrees. The chaplains are even trained here. And so this colonel actually, in his commute daily from his home to the air base, he passes right in front of our church. And he took the time to sit down and to send me a very thoughtful letter asking, Father Williams, why is that sign on the front of your Catholic church? What was your motivation? Can you please explain it to me? I'm not being super critical of it, but I just want to know why. And so I took the time over the course of a couple of days, maybe even a week, to sit down and to pen a response to him that not only traced my own family's history as a multiracial family, but also my father and mother's activities. My father, as I mentioned previous, drove during the Montgomery bus corps. My mother taught first and second grade for almost 40 years in the public schools of Central Alabama, and was the first African American woman to teach in what was then called an integrated school. And in the late 60s and early 70s, integration meant that you closed the Black institutions uh, and made their leadership subordinate to the white principals and superintendents, et cetera. And you left the Black facilities because typically they were not as well produced and financed and maintained and equipped as the white schools. And so I shared all of that, and I shared the um, the work that we do uh, that I've been privileged to be a part of at the Institute of Black Catholic Studies, and how Sister Eva and myself were formed by these giant men and women of the modern Black Catholic history and justice movement. And I shared that with him, and I knew that there would be others who might perhaps not take the time to ask with respect and with thoughtfulness why the banner was there. So I sent it to the Archbishop of Mobile and to the Chancellor of the Archdiocese of Mobile. And I said to them, I know that you're getting a host of complaints and probably letters and phone calls about this banner. And so this is my explanation as to why it's there, why I am going to state boldly it should stay there, and why I hope and would one day long for a church where a banner like that would be on the facade of every Catholic church. And I said, you have my permission to send this letter to every person who calls, every person who sends an email, every person who complains. But you do not have permission to change one bit of punctuation or syntax or spelling. Send it as it is. Do not edit it to fit what you think should be the proper response to such inquiries, or to weaken or to lessen the efficacy or the intentionality of what I said in the letter. Well, typical Roman churchmen, they wouldn't leave that alone. And so they sent me back a copy with some edits that they would strongly suggest. And I sent back that copy again with an even more strongly worded letter that says, if you send this out, you do not send it under my pen. If you want my response, that is exactly what you must send. It's my response unedited. Well, we think you could have stressed the fact that pro-life also means uh, that you support Black people and Indigenous people. And I said, yeah, but in the polity of the Catholic Church in the United States, our USCCB, to their shame and to my angst and hurt, has for more than 50 or 60 years now reduced the social teaching of the Catholic Church to whether one is anti-abortion enough. And the movement is not really pro-life, it's pro-birth, it's birtherism. And to my mind, it's rooted in misogyny, it's rooted in racism, it's rooted in a refusal to look at the almost centuries, more than a century now, of Catholic social teaching, beginning with our beloved Leo the 13th. And that how can we say that we are a pro-life church when so much of our leadership is countenancing xenophobia and misogyny and grifting? And again, the pillar upon which their complicity stands is patriarchy, it's racism, it's privilege. So ultimately, I heard back from the Chancery, we will send your letter as you wrote it. And I said, thank you very much. Now, there was another reaction. One day I'm sitting here in my rectory minding my own business, and the doorbell rings, and I go to answer, and there is an elderly white woman who's very disheveled, and she is red-faced, and she's crying, and she's teary. And my immediate thought was, as there's uh, a bypass highway in front of our church, that maybe there was an accident or something happened. So I ushered her in to the little anteroom there at the front door of the residence and said, "Ma'am, can I help you? Are you okay? Do you need me to call an ambulance, or do you need water? What's the problem?" And as she gathered herself, she got enough composure to point back at the church. And she said with halting voice, "That sign. Why is that sign on a Catholic church? You've got to take it down now." And so I sat her down and I said, "Well, ma'am, let me explain something to you." I said, "First, let me ask you a question. Have you ever been here before?" And she said, "No." I said, "Have you ever worshiped? Have you ever attended Mass with us here at Resurrection?" And she said, "No." I said, "So you feel compelled to come to the clerical residence of this parish and to tell me, having never seen me before, I would assume as well, what I must do about a sign on the front of our place of worship?" And she said, "Yes, the founders of BLM are lesbians and they are pro-abortion." And I did take some comfort in knowing that at least she'd done some research. You know, it just wasn't an abject racist reaction to the sign. And I said, "Well, ma'am, I don't think pro-abortion is one of the tenets." And I said, "I do know that at least one or two of the founders of the movement are women who are same gender loving, but that does not negate, that does not deny the truth of the statement that Black lives matter." I said, "What I want you to understand is white lives and blue lives and most other lives in this country have always mattered. But clearly, with what we saw on the streets of Minneapolis that day, it was a coalescing of a unforgivable, yet we must, but a signal part of American history and culture is that Black bodies and Black lives have never really truly mattered." And so after a few minutes, she said, "So you're not going to take it down?" And I said, "No, ma'am, I'm not. But what I would invite you to do is to come any Sunday and pray with us and get to know the people of this community. And maybe you'll begin to understand why that sign is important and what it represents for us." I am a firm believer that we have to be compassionate, but especially as we heard in that beautiful prayer that Jack started us with, we have to be bold. We have to speak with conviction. We have to speak with compassion, but we have to be every Sunday in our common prayers, our prayers of the faithful here at Resurrection. We pray uh, for honest and compassionate ecclesial and political discourse. Honest and compassionate, because if either is listening, it's not a conversation. It's not discourse. It's a diatribe. It's an attack. Uh, and so signs and symbols are important. I want to also say to you today that one of the things that I think I'm particularly challenged by is I had the opportunity to speak to all of the formation men in the Archdiocese of Atlanta 2 years ago as they were doing justice tours here in Montgomery. And these are people from first philosophy all the way to people who were about to be ordained deacons for the Archdiocese of Atlanta. And I said to them that the gospel of Jesus Christ, as in my 30 plus years now presbyteral ministry, to me is a gospel that by its nature is political. It is not partisan, but it is by its very nature political. And if it had not been political, then Jesus would have died of old age. And I don't know what would have happened to our plan of salvation. But it is political. And so your choice at whatever stage of your formation you are in is you will either be chaplains to an empire, and that empire can be clericalism, it can be white supremacy, it can be wealth, it can be misogyny, whatever. You will be chaplains of an empire, or you can be prophets of the kingdom. Prophets of the kingdom. After the massacre of those people at the Topher supermarket in Buffalo, New York, that Saturday afternoon, I'd already prepared my Sunday homily. But I knew that having been taught preaching by none other than servant of God, Thea Bowman, and by still living Adrian Dominican sister Joan Delaplane, that to stand in a pulpit in my faith community and not see how those texts already given in the lectionary for that Sunday could speak a word of comfort, of healing, of challenge, of awareness, even basic awareness of what had just happened in our country with this brutal massacre of these innocent people simply trying to buy their groceries. To ignore that in any oration that Sunday would be malpractice, would be an insult, and would also make me, in one sense, perhaps a very small sense, but complicit in the horror that had happened in that supermarket. And I began the homily by saying, I am sadly aware that in perhaps 95% of Catholic parishes across this country this Sunday morning, not one reference, not one word, not one mention of how these texts speak to what we saw and experienced as a country yesterday will be said, will be heard, will be heard. And so we have to be deliberate in our signs, in our symbols, and in the power, again, of our sacraments to build coalitions and to help us to build this beloved community. In November of 2022, Father Gregory Chisholm, S.J., was serving as pastor of St. Charles Borromeo Church in Harlem, New York, one of the mother churches of Black Catholicism in that archdiocese. And Father Greg, scholar, doctor in mechanical engineering, as well as a brilliant pastor, preached the homily there at St. Patrick's Cathedral for the Black Catholic History Month celebration of the Archdiocese in all of the diversity of the African American diaspora, African American Catholic community of that Archdiocese. And he preached a prophetic and loving and thoughtful challenge, vigorously and poetically aware of where we were emerging out of the COVID pandemic, and vividly and poetically and aware of the events of the Topher and the events of George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis. And at the end of the homily, the congregation was just awash. I mean, there was almost a stunned silence before some semblance of applause started to emerge. But presiding over that liturgy was the Cardinal Archbishop of the Archdiocese of New York, Cardinal Dolan. And Cardinal Dolan, in previous events there in that cathedral and in other public venues, had sent warm and solicitous greetings to the President of the United States, Donald Trump. And to my mind, and in my Facebook post, I have certainly said this, that one of the scandals of the last 10 or 15 years has been the quiet complicity of too much of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, as we have seen horrors that move us toward a precursor to Nazi Germany in the 30s being perpetrated upon people of color, upon immigrants, upon women, upon those who are being dehumanized and marginalized. And our bishops, for the most part, have been silent. And even worse than that, some of them have lauded the apostle of the hate, the apostle of the dissension and the anger and the misogyny and the racism. And so, as a result of that homily, because Father Greg did not call the Cardinal Archbishop by name, but he called out the complicity and the racism, and noted that in 1968, African American Catholic men who were deacons and clergy, and our one bishop, Harold Perry, of the Auxiliary Bishop of New Orleans, as well as the nascent National Black Catholic Sisters Conference, gathered in two meeting places in the Midwest, and they declared in a document that the Catholic Church in the United States is a white racist institution. And he noted that in so many ways, the truth of that statement in 2022 remains truthful, prophetic, and sadly real. In 2021, Black History Month celebration. And I think that link will be available. And it is a powerful, powerful, powerful example of what we must do if we're going to build a beloved community. My fifth point is, given that, given that call that we have in sign and sacrament and symbol in preaching to be proximate, to make collaboration and to coalesce around values that we share in common, we have to expect and be prepared for retribution. We have to expect and be prepared for retribution. So we each need to know in our personal discipleship, in our institutional and organizational structures and commitments, what are we prepared to risk? What are we prepared to give up? And it's very much an invitation for us to experience what the first, second, and third century Christians experienced. What we prepare to risk for our proclamation of the gospel. Resurrection Catholic Missions and our church here, we have been doing direct mail fundraising for over 60 years and participated, as Andrea said in the introduction, as founding organization of the National Catholic Development Conference, which is basically a bunch of smaller Catholic institutions doing a lot of direct education, direct aid service, a lot of small religious congregations who did not have hospitals that produce good amount of wealth and independence, who were trying to meet direct needs of marginalized communities across the country. After that sign, Black Lives Matter went up. The cadre of local donors, and because we actually had a picture taken and put it in one of our newsletters where our first communion class stood up under the banner, and that was in one of our fundraising pieces. I got letters from people who said, I am not sending Resurrection or you, Father, another penny until you take that sign down. And I'll be checking to see if it's come down for the local people. You got to be prepared for retribution and to understand what you're willing to risk. Father Chisholm, after that homily in November of 2021 at St. Patrick's Cathedral, was invited to seek other ministries outside of the Archdiocese of New York. You have to be prepared for retribution. The Vicar for Catholic Education and the Archbishop of Mobile sent me a letter about 2 years after maybe it's about a year and a half after the sign went up, informing me that our pre-K through 8th grade traditional Catholic school, serving a population of people with 70% of our students qualified for reduced or free child nutrition lunches, that we could still use the name Catholic, but we would receive no institutional or administrative support from the Office of Catholic Education. Still use the name, but you can come to our meetings if you wish, but in terms of policy and the resources that even that small Office of Catholic Education has in an archdiocese of only about under 100,000 Catholic believers, we're not going to do anything for you. When I came home to this parish in this archdiocese in 1990, after teaching in Chicago in one of our Resurrectionist high schools, there were 12 predominantly African-American Catholic schools in this archdiocese. In 2025, there are 2. Our school here and one in Mobile. Financial support has never existed. It's always been raised by the religious orders who did most of the ministry in the Deep South. And so I'm very much aware that if we are going to be committed to the values of DEI, you've got to be prepared for the retribution that will come from foes and sometimes even from supporters, from those who might agree with certain aspects of our work and our advocacy, but not all of it. My 6th point is we have to form ourselves, and especially our young people, for justice. And one of those formative devices, practices, is we have to develop a common language, a common understanding. A few years ago, I had the privilege of co-teaching a class with Father Gregory Hiley, who's Director of Evangelization and Director of the Doctoral Program in Preaching at Aquinas Institute of Theology in St. Louis. And the course was kind of inaptly named Anti-Racism Preaching. I think it might have been more appropriately named Preaching Racial Justice. And one of the devices that we used for the 10 or 12 uh, ministry practitioners who took this digital course, this Zoom course with us, was a podcast developed by Duke University called Seeing White. Seeing White. And I know that link will also be in the chat. And it is a phenomenal, perhaps now I think 12 or 13 uh, segment podcast, which talks about the foundational principles of race and whiteness and uh, white supremacy that I think is absolutely essential for us to understand before we can ever have any conversations that will be efficacious towards building the beloved community, towards what we used to call having racial harmony or whatever. These podcasts are invaluable. And one of the things that they say so very clearly is something that other scholars like Ibrahim Zindi and other scholars in the African American community have been saying for years. Race is a social construct. It is an economic, cultural construct, a social construct, which has no validity in scientific or genetic reality. And the way that we commonly use that word and understand it too often leads to well-meaning attempts at building the beloved community, but the dialogue is doomed from the very beginning because we're not speaking a common language. And so it either leads to people of color being angered or resigned or just determined to not have these conversations again, or non-melanated people, white people being saddled with either guilt or angst or anxiety or anger because the language, the words that we're using to talk to each other, to talk about our experience is not common. We don't mean the same things when we say some of the same words. And so that podcast, I've almost gotten to the point now where I don't think I will, if I'm ever asked to do another course like that, certainly that will be part of the curriculum. But even in more less formal situations where some of the insights of that, we have to set some foundational principles, good Dominican and Jesuitical theology. We got to define our terms. We got to define our terms. Otherwise, we're like ships passing each other, trying to go in the same direction, but not going there with the same efficacy and speed. Uh, Part of the fascinating stuff that's happened since Leo the 14th, 15th has been 14th has been elected to the papacy is the genealogist of Louisiana who took one look at his surname and realized that that is a very common name in the Creole and mixed race cultures of Louisiana, and did the genealogical research to identify great grandparentage for His Holiness that includes free people of color, Creole, mixed race people on both sides, on his maternal side, and Haitian, perhaps mixed people of color on his paternal grandfather's side. And so this notion of race is so malleable and is so misunderstood. Here in Alabama, we had an immigration of Lebanese uh, people who, many of whom were Maronite rite, but ultimately most found themselves having just to practice the other Roman rite, who in many cases are darker than half of the people in my family. But they were compelled in their immigration coming to the Deep South to choose. And they chose to be white. They chose to be white. And so this notion of whiteness and understanding of race is going to be absolutely critical for us if we're going to have conversations and activities that will promote the beloved community, that will highlight and build up the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one of the podcasters said, why in the world would we think that a Sicilian in Palermo is white in the same way that a Finn in Helsinki is? Doesn't it just seem more sensible to look and to say, Palermo is right off the coast of Northern Africa. And so maybe that Sicilian shares more genetic material with a Tunisian or a Libyan than he does with a Laplander up in Sweden and so the whole notion of race as we have used it in this country and has been the source of so much degradation and has formed so much of our history and our culture is flawed. And we need to talk about that and we need to establish a common language. My final point, and I know I'm over, is I want to encourage you and all of us to do what African American people have done from the very beginning of our sojourn in this new world, both in South, Central, and North America. And that is to not give to not give up, to not grow weary. Martin Luther King was absolutely right. The arc of the universe, the moral arc of the universe, bends towards justice. And even when we experience in these days concerted, deliberate, almost numbing efforts to undo the progress that we have made as a people, as a nation, and indeed, as, in many ways, as a world and as a church, we must not grow weary. We must not give up. In the chapter that I uh, contributed to the book Preaching Racial Justice, I used the image and the story of my four great grandmothers, who were all women of faith, three of them Protestant, one of them Catholic. And the one thing that united these women, poor, born female in the Deep South, was they were people of faith. And that faith was expressed through deep prayer life and through the gift of song. And so I suggested in my chapter that perhaps uh, preachers who cannot preach prophetically because their livelihoods might depend upon it, or they might meet with concerted resistance from the congregants, from the community that they're serving, is use the gift of song. Sometimes you can say some things in a song and a melody, and especially in the wide array of sacred music and cultural music that African American people have brought to this country and to this church, you can say some things that if you said it out plainly in English and whatever other language is your primary form of communication, folks might not hear it, might not, as one of my grandmothers would say, that you have to put the hay where the horses can eat it. And so we can use music, we can use those idioms sometimes to challenge and to invite people to a deeper sense of relationship. And so do not give up, even in these days when it seems like the forces of darkness are prevailing. Pray, sing, celebrate. My 90-year-old father has started walking again with a very determined program. And I said to him a few weeks ago, Daddy, why are you walking? Are you, he's in marvelous shape for a 91-year-old. And I said, so you're trying to stay healthy? And he said, no. He said, I'm getting ready because it looks like we're going to have to march again for our rights. And I want to be in good enough shape to march. We can't give up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Father Manuel. I feel like me with everyone else here is absorbing all that you had to share with us. We're so grateful to you for sharing on this important topic, for connecting the critical value of D.E.I. As part of our essential part of our Christian faith tradition. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I see we've gotten a couple questions in the chat for Father Emmanuel. And we're going to give you a few minutes to continue putting any questions that you have in the chat. And while you do that, I'm just going to share take a few moments to share some upcoming opportunities that we have at Just Faith Ministries to help equip your communities to do as Father Manuel said, to do something and to equip your communities, you personally, to speak up and take action on issues impacting your area and this country. And so first, we all remain concerned and heartbroken about the cruel deportation policies being enacted in our communities. And so we have an opportunity for you to learn more about the history of U.S. immigration policies and how to engage in healthy and holy dialogue on immigration issues. So consider bringing our Faith in Immigration Justice program to your community. And I believe, do we have a slide for that up? But we'll have next Tuesday, we'll be hosting an information session to provide an overview of this program and to provide wisdom and tips for bringing this program to your organization or community. And then we also, again, and if you want to find more opportunities to do something, to dig deeper into your understanding of how our Christian faith compels us to action on issues of racial justice, or want to learn how you can talk about racial privilege in your faith community, consider also attending our upcoming information session on Just Faith's 3-part racial justice series. I see many people on this call who I know have participated in one or all of that series already. But you can learn more if you haven't or are considering participating in that, bringing that to your community. So that information session will be held on Tuesday, May 27th at 12:30 Eastern, 9:30 Pacific time. And then finally, we hope that you'll join us next month for our Acting for Justice webinar on June 12th, when we will welcome back Bob Hunter, Just Faith board member and diversity and justice consultant. He will be presenting on history, the missing ingredient in challenging conversations. So we look forward to welcoming Bob back here in June. And then last thing, if you're new here to Just Faith Ministries, we welcome you. And we invite you to explore our programs and attend one of those upcoming information sessions to learn more about all of our Just Faith programs. There's never been a more critical time, as we have heard now, for the work of education and justice. And we thank you for showing up here in this space. When you're ready, we invite you to consider bringing one of our 6 to 8 week programs to your church or community. With Just Faith programs, we help you bring 8 to 12 people together to learn about issues of justice and how the gospel calls us to take action. You don't have to be an expert on these topics or have experience leading these groups in order to be a facilitator. We give you all the resources and training you need to facilitate online or over Zoom in your church, community center, or in your home. So now, let's go back to Jack and Father Manuel, and we can take some questions and have a few minutes of conversation here.
Father Manuel, we had one of our attendees write in that in their diocese, archdiocese, a parish put up a Black Lives Matter sign, and within a year, the Jesuits who ran the parish were invited to leave, and they were just saying, "You're right, you know, you got to be prepared for the retribution." She goes on to say that I have friends who are considering leaving the Catholic Church over this kind of response. So can you say something about the importance of doing the work within the Catholic framework? Or how would you respond? How would you be an encouragement here?
It is extremely difficult, but one of my, and Sister Eva and Sister Gail Awanga will know this, and perhaps some others. One of my dear friends is Father Brian Massingale, who is the professor of Christian ethics at Fordham. And I've been blessed to have Brian come and help us here at the parish, as I'm a sole practitioner for Holy Week services and for other events. And he's actually even done a presentation with Father Maurice Nutt on the last pastoral letter that the USCCB promulgated on racism, which was, in my mind, a very nice, sweet little document that said, "Be nice to the Negroes." Nothing prophetic about it. So, it can be very disheartening, but I know that within the institution, even as frustrating as it can be, our very presence, let alone our preaching, our teaching, our advocacy. We work here at Resurrection with another group founded by a Jesuit priest called, it was PICO, People Engaged in Community Organizing, now known as Faith in Action. And one of the tenets of PICO, of Faith in Action, is we have power by our bodies, by our bucks, and by our ballots. And so I try and translate that into how do we exercise that same kind of power within our ecclesial community? And one of the ways is by staying here. If we all depart and leave, then the remnant church that remains will not be the Catholic Big C church or the Catholic Little C church. And so presence is absolutely a resistance act, just being there. Even when you go to meetings where when you come home, you want to swallow a bottle of Tylenol, stay and participate in the meeting, stay and fight. The other is to uh, look for small victories. You know, we were a little indemnified because in in the model of Catholicism that we inherited here, in what I call the Upper South, these parishes and institutions and Catholic communities that are 150, 200 miles away from the Gulf Coast, where in Florida and Mississippi and Alabama and Texas and Louisiana, you had traditional Catholic communities, and one of the few uh, humane things that the French and Spanish enslavers did to the enslaved persons is they kept records. And so they recorded baptisms, they recorded marriages, they acknowledged at least that level of humanity. And so uh, that tradition uh, uh, does not exist in the Upper South, in the areas where I was born and raised. And so as a result of that, so many of our folks come to Catholicism because they saw in it the action of religious women and men who left the great Catholic centers, these ethnic Catholic enclaves in Chicago and Milwaukee and Cincinnati and New York and Buffalo, and came south, predominantly members of religious orders, and decided, probably as a response to a papal invitation, to become a missionary church. You know, Leo XIV is telling them we got to be a missionary church again. Uh, and they came to communities that were underserved. And in doing so, they presented a notion, a model of Catholic Christianity that I think is still extant, that can still be a source of inspiration. Um, and so just don't give up, stay and fight. Realize that um, there have been small victories. There have been small victories. Um, one of the things that the African American Catholic community has asked of the Roman Church for years has been the gift of education. Gift of education. And so my mother, a first grade, second grade teacher for all of her professional life, looked at the brand spanking new Catholic school that the Resurrection Fathers and the Holy Family Sisters built here in the middle of our subdivision in North Montgomery, and said, that facility beats anything that the public schools are offering for Black children. I don't care if they were teaching voodoo, you're going to that school. Because I can remember saying to Mom, I don't want to go to a Catholic school. They're only going to teach us religion. And she said, I don't care if they teach voodoo. You're going to that school because they have women there who are trained teachers and who are there to make sure that you can compete. And that gift of education has redounded for generations in these Upper South communities. You cannot scratch the surface of Black professional middle class folks in cities like Montgomery, Birmingham, Little Rock, Memphis, Augusta, Atlanta, without tracing somebody back to a Catholic school.
Father Manuel, I was thinking on our call tonight, we have a lot of folks from around the country that I know to be the kind of folks who've been not giving up for a long time. They're folks who've struggled to be in their parish or struggled to be in their diocese. So how about this? This program is being recorded. It's going to be shipped out early part of next week. People will have it and be able to share with whoever they care to. And I would like to think that there's going to be a number of people who are going to take this straight to their pastor or their bishop, and they're going to ask them to watch it. So how about if I give you a minute and a half to say something to that pastor or to that bishop in the thought that they're actually going to hear what you have to say?
What I would say to them is, for 12 years, we as a ecclesial community, as a community of disciples, I love that model of church from Father Dulles, or Cardinal Dulles as he died. We're privileged to have not the perfect ministry of, of Pope Francis, but a sterling example of what we are to be as church. And that image, when he first spoke of the church as not a club for the perfect, but a hospital for those who are ailing, is perhaps the most invitational and inspiring notion of church that I've heard in many, many years. And so I would say to them, let us be exactly what Francis called us to be: shepherds, servant leaders who smell like the sheep, who know the sheep, who interact with the sheep, who realize that it is not an institution that we serve, but it's a community of disciples. The institutional church will take care of itself, but it will be even made stronger when the the church that most people experience, which is their local parish, the place where they pray, where they receive the sacraments, where hopefully they receive homilies and sermons that are comforting, challenging, inviting, uh, exhorting them to be their best selves, both personally in their piety, but also in their obligation to transform the world. Vatican II said the role of the laity is to sanctify the world. And so I would say to that bishop and to that pastor, help your people to sanctify the world. And the committees will take care of themselves, the facilities will take care of themselves, help them to sanctify the world.
Father Manuel, your words have inspired us. I invite everybody on the call to offer the silent clap that we can only do on Zoom. We're so grateful for your presence with us. You've just been a beacon of light for us tonight. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, thank y'all for the work you're doing. When we host the young people from around the country, it gives me hope that that there'll be other soldiers coming along.
So my brothers and sisters, our time is closed tonight. I wanted to close just with a short prayer. And again, I thank you for being with us, and I invite you to join us again next month. Our closing prayer comes from our program, Faith and Racial Equity, Exploring Power and Privilege. We begin with the words of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I refuse to accept the view that mankind is so tragically bound to the midnight of racism and war that the bright daybreak of peace and brotherhood can never become a reality. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word. So let us pray. As people of faith, we work not only to form a just society that is inclusive, but also to transform unjust structures that are exclusive. As people of change, we work to hear the voices of those on the margins, joining our voices with theirs, listening to them for guidance and leadership. As people of hope, give us the courage not to remain silent in the midst of injustice, apathetic toward great need, nor paralyzed by the immensity of the problem. As people of prayer, may unceasing prayer accompany all of our actions as we work together to bring about God's kingdom of justice and peace. Lord, you have given all people one common origin, and your will is to gather them as one family in yourself. Set our hearts on fire with desire to ensure justice for all our sisters and brothers. Empower us to share what we have received from you, that we might rejoice in that day and leap for joy at the coming of your kingdom. Amen. Thanks everybody for being with us. It's good to see all of you, and good night.